Hello gamers, Powered Heal here, and today we're going to be talking about era versus anniversary, or live as I'll call it. So I'm going to break the two sort of game modes down, and I want to talk a little bit about how I feel about each one in relation to things like GDKp and RMT, because I watched a video like last night actually that kind of gave me inspiration to make this one. It was a Meko video, I believe is how you say the content creator's name. I can link it in the description. I'm actually going to be reacting to one of his videos later in the day. He's doing he did a video where he's talking about a druid in Naxxramas and whether this druid did his job or not because he got docked part of his cut in a GDKp, and that was kind of like the main point of the video. But at a certain point in the video, he starts talking about GDKp a little bit more generally. And he basically says something like, oh, thank God they spared Era from the GDKp ban because this would have killed the game. And, this is the only thing keeping kind of Era afloat. And then talks about how GDKp is like a positive thing for the community. So I just wanted to make a little point of clarification here because I think this is a perception that a lot of people have, that they're surprised Era got spared and that they think that that's kind of like a lucky thing, and I think that's why they might be so concerned about the GKP situation, because a lot of these people do like to play on Era, and they think if GDKP goes away, Era is going to just disintegrate. And I kind of understand what they mean by that, and I want to get into the differences between the two game modes and why I think I'm okay with something like GDKp existing in Era, but that I don't want it in Anniversary, I don't want it in Classic Plus or any of the Surface Going Future. So I would basically say that the main difference between Era and the quote-unquote live servers, which I'll be talking about in terms like things like Anniversary, when there's like a new fresh, or Classic Plus going forward in the future, those would be the live servers. Things like Season of Discovery, Season of Mastery would count for this, okay? Now, Era is the Era server, right? It's the sort of non-ladder of the World of Warcraft universe. You know how in Diablo you had the ladder, which was the new season, and then once the season was done, all those characters went back into non-ladder, and then you get a new ladder season started. So that's kind of the premise behind a lot of this stuff. And if you notice, Blizzard, Blizzard didn't really care about Diablo 2 for quite a while, I guess, but at the start, even when there was more focus on Diablo 2, there wasn't a ton of concern about non-ladder, right? And I think this is just a natural byproduct of the situation, right? Because, you have a bunch of old characters on non-ladder, or in this case, Classic Era, and there's an inconsistent amount of people playing at various times, right? And sometimes when there's not a new fresh out or something like that, there'll be a lot more people. When there is a new fresh out, the population tends to heavily drop off. There's going to be those lifers that play Era all the time, that they're going to be running raids no matter what's going on the new servers or anything like that. So there's a community, and it's real and it exists, but it fluctuates. And because of that, I feel like making any changes can be a bit scary. And I understand what Meko and other people like him fear when they think about losing GDKp on Era, because I think he's right, actually. I think if GDKp disappeared on Era, that would kill a lot of people's incentive to play the game, because, to be honest, there's really not that many people interested in playing to start with, so they kind of need an incentive to get out there and to keep playing, because a lot of these people, they've done everything possible in the game. They have everything they want in a certain character. They may have multiple characters that are fully bissed out. Okay, so it really makes sense that they sort of need a little bit of a motivation. Now, also, the way Era works is it's just not super easy to get items necessarily. The liquidity isn't always there in kind of like the market. So like you might go on the auction house and certain things might be like really expensive, right? If they haven't been posted in a bit, or they may not be there, or you know what I mean? You may run into these problems, especially because I believe on Era that we don't have cross-faction auction house. And I don't think this is something that they would ever implement. But I don't think that's a thing. So this obviously further exacerbates this problem, though, right? Because there's not many people on each side to begin with, and therefore there's not many mats on the auction house, and it's split between two factions, or not even necessarily an equal split, or it could be 30 or 40% alliance, 50 to 60% horde, who knows. So I understand totally the idea of wanting to keep error around on GDKp around on the error servers. And I don't think anybody's trying to take that away from him or anybody else, to be honest. I don't think Blizzard will touch GDKp on error. I don't think that was ever the plan. And I think that Blizzard knows that economy, that situation, it's so messy, right? Because there's been so much gold buying, there's been so much mage boosting and dungeon farming, just so much RNT in general, that to step in at this point when all that stuff has been integrated into that economy for so long, and then really put your foot down and be like, oh, you can't do this on the server, right? It just completely disrupts the entire ecosystem. Now, there's some people that still do, I'm sure, RMT and buy gold on there, and that kind of sucks, right? That's not looked into more. But the reality of the situation is just that that's never going to be Blizzard's focus, because it's already something that's kind of in the past. Not many people play it, and it's already kind of gotten marred. And this is, in my opinion, the big point of fresh servers, and one of the reasons that I like fresh servers in games. And this is a reason why I don't want GDKp on the fresh servers, but I don't mind it on the older servers. And that is basically this concept that over time, the economy gets ruined in any MMO. Okay, so if you have an MMO going long enough, it doesn't really matter what it is. The economy is going to get messed with by all these bots, all the RMT. Now, there's some games like RuneScape where the devs take a very active control in the economy. This is likely because that game is so grindy, in my opinion, that they don't feel like the fresh server model really works for them outside of those community events they do, where they do they do fresh starts kind of, but they're never like pure fresh starts. They're kind of they're always augmented in a way where there's like a special seasonal aspect that's like way different than something like even Season of Mastery was, or honestly even Season of Discovery. Like the XP rates are way up on certain skills and stuff like that. And I think that the reason they do that is because they know that they're not, most people aren't going to want to come back to RuneScape every year and get their mining or whatever, or their combat stats to 99 again, or something like that. It's just going to be a super arduous grind. So RuneScape they're very cognizant that their bread is buttered in the current game, and because of that, they do very heavy economic interventions. Like, they will actually, I believe, my friend told me, they go into the auction house and they'll buy too many of a certain thing if like too many of them got farmed or something like that. Like, they're trying to keep the rarity of things in a certain like bracket, essentially, if you can think of it like that. Keep the availability of things in a certain bracket, and I think they'll buy things and just essentially destroy them or something like that. So it's very interesting how they do things, right? But Blizzard has not done this. I don't think they'll do this any time in the future. So basically, anytime you have an expansion or a new fresh or something like that, it starts out, everything's sort of pretty normative, right? The bots, even at the start, aren't able to make that significant of an impact because they have to level up before they can really contribute to the economy. But inevitably, what happens is they do level up, and they start injecting just tons of gold into the economy. So it's things kind of get marred over time, right? And there's not really a way to prevent this, in my opinion. The most obvious thing that Meko says in the video, and other people say all the time, is that you need to ban the bots, right? And I think they could do a better job banning the bots, but even in a situation where they did a much better job, there would still be bots in the game, there would still be RMT, and you're not going to get everything, right? And over time, this stuff is going to take its toll on a game, and this is, in my opinion, why they actually add the WoW token to games, because once they view the economic situation as being so far gone that it maybe causes more harm than good to not have things like the token in the game, they will add the token to the game. There's this kind of conspiracy theory that Blizzard makes a ton on the token. I don't think this is really that true. I don't think that they even make much like per transaction. I think it's like cents. I've heard them come out and say at some point. I want to say, like, somebody let me know down in the comments if there's like a confirmation on that. But I don't really think they make much money on each transaction. I think because it's not like they're directly selling you gold, right? Like they're just facilitating basically gold being passed from one member in the community to another for IRL money, right? So obviously that's not really something that we want. Most of the people that watch this channel don't want this, but um, they view it at some point as a lesser evil because this is going on so much behind the scenes and because there is so much bought gold in the given economy. And this is why I think in Wrath of the Lich King they added the WoW token back in the original era line or the original classic line, and they didn't actually add a token to Anniversary. As far as I know, they haven't added a token to the Burning Crusade yet, and people were saying that they were like, oh, the token is coming. I don't think the token is necessarily going to come in the Burning Crusade. It might come in that version of Wrath, right? Because at that point, that's where they might feel the economy has degraded enough to warrant it. It may not actually come in Wrath, keep in mind, because they've taken steps to try and reduce some of the RMT and the botting and stuff like that. I don't know that it's been very successful, so it'll be kind of up to them to decide whether, hey, this economy is shot. We're just going to add the token in or not. Okay, so but that's sort of their mentality. And because of that, they're never going to touch Era, in my opinion. They're never going to add a token to Era. They're never going to ban GDKp in Era. If you like playing Era, they're going to keep Era. I don't want to say completely as it is, because they made some small changes with the last anniversary update, right? So I understand people are looking at that, and that's the precedent, right? And people are like, oh, so if they're going to make those changes, why not make the other changes? To me, it just doesn't make sense ever to make the GDKp change or the token change. I think that the reason why the other changes went through is because it was just going to be harder to do integration, probably, if you had these characters that had dual spec and stuff like that, and then tried to move them into an environment where there wasn't. It was probably something to do with that, or they had just kind of made the executive design decision that it's silly to not have dual spec, right? So that's something that I was surprised about, honestly, but ultimately I think does make for a little bit better of a game. I think especially, here's the other problem with that in Era, right, is the gold inflation is so out of control that the original point of the spec swapping to help remove gold from the game, that's not going to help anymore, right? There's just too much gold. People don't respec enough for that to really be a thing. And at some point, it only hurts new players trying to get into Era because they have proportionally way less gold than somebody who's been playing Era for a while, right? So at some point, it doesn't affect the players who you want to be restricted by swapping specs, and it's really affecting players that are just new players that are kind of coming into the game fresh, and or maybe they're not completely new, but they're starting an Era new, and they don't have a super reliable way to make gold. The respec costs are really expensive. It's just very prohibitive for them to try things and see what they like and try different specs, right? So I think that's the reason why they ended up making that change on Era, but I don't see anything like the GDKp ban coming to Era or anything else of that sort. So yeah, I don't think there needs to be a conflict between like the two communities in that way, and even somebody like me who is very, very, I'm about as anti GDKp as you can get. Like, I don't want there to be no GDKp on Era because I understand it's just so integrated into the system there that to remove it would risk the actual population of the server, right? However, in the new servers, the reason why we don't want GDKp is because we want the server to be as pristine for as long as possible. And everybody that makes this argument that GDKp has nothing to do with people buying gold, I think this is just incredibly naive. Like, obviously, people buy gold for lots of reasons. That's not the only reason. However, one of the things that Meko talks about in the video, which I'll probably end up responding to again when I actually do the reaction video to his other video, is that he talks about how the GDKp ban didn't help prices or anything like that. And that's not what it was meant to do, right? Because the prices on the server were just caused by the fact that it's a mega server and there's a lot of people competing for scarce amounts of resources. That was always going to be the case. Prices were always going to skyrocket, right? So I think what's actually going to happen in a Classic Plus is that they're just going to make a lot of the materials way more ubiquitous, especially kind of the rare materials, which I'm not really a big fan of, but I think that's just going to be the reality. Uh, like the community has sort of spoken on that, and people, they just want to be drip fed every possible consumable at every given time, and they don't want to have to put in any effort to acquire anything. So Blizzard is going to make it as easy as possible for players to get things like flasks, potions, and stuff like that. I would imagine. I think some of the stuff that we actually seen in the leaks, which I'm going to be talking about shortly in a different video, I think even though I think the leaks overall were fake, I think some of that stuff is coming to the actual game. So they'll likely have potions that come from quests or stuff like that, or reputation vendors, and like alternative ways to actually get resources, which I think is going to really hurt gathering professions, unfortunately. But we'll just have to see how that actually turns out, right? But yeah, more about that when we actually get into the leaks topic. So yeah, I think that they're actively working to make that situation better. And the thing is if they make it so that consumes are very accessible in whatever version of the game we're getting next, like let's say Classic Plus, then what's going to end up happening is the only other outlet that people would RMT for is, buying gear essentially, right? So if you don't have GDKp in the game, then that's a very sort of obvious way to curtail any sort of gold buying or anything at that point, because what are you buying gold for? You don't need it for consumes because consumes are super cheap, and you can't buy gear with it in GDKPs. So for your average player, there's not going to be really that much incentive buying gold. Now, obviously, there's still people doing like the shadow GDKP and stuff like that. I think that this will still exist to some degree. I think it'll be less likely shadow GDKPs where people are using things like Black Lotus and stuff like that. I think that stuff will get cracked down on, especially in something like a Classic Plus, which is probably going to be Blizzard's main focus once they launch it. Right? I think there's going to be increased moderation around stuff like this. What I would be more concerned about is the people that do this sort of thing where it's like, okay, under the table, we're hard reserving this to X guy, but he actually paid like 25,000 gold behind the scenes. Stuff like that is a lot harder to avoid, but it's also less common, right? You would see a lot more quote-unquote RMT if you allow GDKP in that environment, as opposed to only some people are going to participate in this like super illicit black market, right? Now, this upsets people because they're like, well, that means it's only those few people benefiting, so it's even worse though. You might as well put GDKP in, and then at least that way tons of people can benefit. But it's like, yeah, but now it doesn't really help that much either, because the people that are trying to play legit in the GDKP system just get completely screwed because they're always losing to people who, on the expensive items, right, who are RMTing. So I don't think that's a good solution either. I think the best solution is just to ban the GDKP on the new servers, and then what you do is you have like a team that kind of tries to root out and look into these cases of people doing the shady RMT stuff under the table. I think that's the best way to essentially go about this. I don't know if you're going to actually have like a full-on team, right? But you could definitely have... I think that it's not unreasonable to assume there'll be an increase in moderation presence in this version of the game. I think that's kind of all you need, to be honest. As long as people are looking at this to some degree, and if they get reports about suspicious activities, people look into it. They're tracking some of the gold trades. I think if you do this, if they step up a little bit in the moderation category, they should be able to create enough fear that many people are not going to do this. Now, obviously, you're not going to prevent this from happening with everybody, right? There's still going to be some people that get to the system and do this, but for the vast majority of people, I think we will have rooted out a lot of the actual RMT and stuff like that. So I think that's their plan going forward. That's what I would like to see in Classic Plus, and that's why I don't want to see Classic Plus have GDKP in it. But again, just because I don't want to see Classic Plus have GDKP in it, I don't want to take that away from Era, because it's just sort of it's so built into the structure of the game that that's the only reason people are going to play. That's not going to be the same for Classic Plus. And people were talking about in Era, oh, the only reason, Era would have survived, or not Era, Anniversary would have survived so much better if you had GDKp. There's a slight argument to be had there, but only because Anniversary is already so played out, right? As I talked about in a previous video, part of the frustration, and I think part of why the RMT gets worse in every version of Anniversary, is because it's so much less about the exploration, right? Because nothing is novel anymore. We know what happens. We know how to get the best gear. We know everything, right? So in a system like that, it's much less about figuring out what's good and working to obtain what's good. It's more like, hey, I didn't have said thing the last 2 or 3 freshes. This might be the last go around. I want to have it this time. I'm going to purchase gold to RMT and buy this item, right? So I think that's why we see, or I didn't get into a top guild because I wasn't able to afford flasks last time. So I'm just going to spend as much as I need on G2G in order to get flask for this time around, stuff like that. That's not going to be anywhere near as common in Classic Plus because it's going to be a shared new environment, right? Where there's less of a focus on this complete min-maxing culture. Like, part of the reason min-maxing culture is so bad in Anniversary, people think that it's just like a, that there's like more people than ever interested in it. And I think that that's kind of true. But the reason why they're interested more than ever is because there's like, they feel like there's nothing else to do in the game, right? Everything else is played out but doing the min-maxing. I think that's how a lot of people feel. Ideally, going into Classic Plus, there's going to be so much new in the game that the focus won't have to be, oh, we have to min-max like every aspect of this one raid or, this one class I'm on or something like that. People are going to be making alts. They're going to be collecting like trinkets probably and mounts and stuff like that. And there's going to be, I'm sure, a bunch of stuff in the game for people to do. So it's really not going to be this obsession with like, oh, I need to rectify my last fresh was like so bad, and I need to like rectify this and do everything the right way this time because it's going to be new and everybody's just going to be exploring everything. Now, in the future, if they end up doing the model where you basically just rerun Classic Plus in new freshes over and over again, eventually Classic Plus will hit that point where, people know the deal, right? And it's going to be highly optimized from the go in a new fresh. So this problem is going to repeat itself, but it's always going to repeat itself to some degree. And the only thing you can do is add new content and buy more time. And that's kind of what they're going to be hoping to do, I think, with Classic Plus in the future, is they're going to have the Classic Plus release. It's going to hopefully do big numbers, keep people interested in for a while, give them time to make an additional version of the game or additional content for the game. And then that's going to prevent some of these effects from being felt in the longer term, right? Because you're always going to have something that's sort of new, something that's sort of novel. When you think about, Classic 2019 and then SOM and then Classic Anniversary, those 3 things were basically 3 official releases of essentially the exact same game with some minor changes in SOM, and then basically, reverting most of those changes in Anniversary, and just having pretty close to the same base 2019 experience. So, yeah, I mean, it's just to expect people to care about the game as much at that point, there's just going to be a natural degradation, right? And you're just going to be left over with the super hardcores that want to min-max everything. That's not going to be the case for Classic Plus. Everybody's going to want to be involved. And you're not going to experience this thing where, like, oh, people are so bored of the game because GDKp is not in there, right? So if that's what you're worried about as a GDKp player, you don't have to worry about that. It's not going to be a thing. There's going to be tons of groups for everything in Classic Plus, unless they bomb the game, obviously. And then if the game's just super bad, then none of this even matters to begin with, right? But presumably they're not going to completely ruin the game. And if they don't, people are going to be playing for quite a while. There's going to be a lot of stuff to do. There's going to be tons of groups. And I imagine the content is probably going to be paced in a way that's pretty gradual because they want to give themselves more time to develop things, right? So that's my thoughts on the situation. At the end of the day, Era and like the live servers are just very different, and they should be treated differently. And don't worry, I don't think I'm certainly not, and I don't think Blizzard is coming after your Era GDKPs anytime soon. So, yeah, if you like content like this, like, comment, and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys next time. See ya.